All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about the cerebrum in this lecture. Cool, so excited. All right, so I'm going to hide you so you can get a better view of things. All right, so we're going to talk about the different lobes of the cerebrum, something called the basal ganglia, the limbic system, and then the part that's really, I don't know, I think is kind of fun and exciting, are the functional organizations of the brain. So we'll talk about sensory areas, motor areas, what are things that are called association areas. We'll talk a little bit about hemispheric lateralization and also what can go wrong. And then we'll have a separate lecture discussing memory as well. So let's take a look at the different lobes of the brain. Okay. So one of the things you'll notice that a lot of these are going to carry the names of the bones that they are located near. So here in pink, you'll see there's the frontal lobe. Then we have in blue here the parietal lobe, which is roughly about where the parietal bones would have been. You have the occipital lobe in the back. Then you have this temporal lobe in purple, on either side. So really, the brain, and I'll kind of throw it back on here. It kind of reminds, oh, you can't see it that way. No, you still can't see it. Hold on. Like that. It kind of looks like a boxing glove, right? So here's a temporal lobe, sort of where your thumb is. And then the frontal lobe is somewhere here in the front. I mean, it reminds me of a boxing glove. So those are our major brain lobes of our cerebellum. You'll notice that we have this fissure. It's called a fissure. It's not a sulcus, it's a fissure because it goes really deep down. And that's what's going to split the cerebrum into left and right halves. Okay. You'll notice, and I think this is pretty obvious, we all know this, you have all these squiggles on the brain. Those actual squiggles are called gyri, plural, or gyrus singular. So there's one sort of fold of the brain. Now, if you're folding things, right, that means you get a crease in the middle. Those creases are called a sulcus, right? So the crease is a sulcus, the actual fold, the material itself, is the gyrus. And then when you have a particularly big one that goes very deep, we call that a fissure. Okay? And you'll have seen this, or you will see this, depending on when you're watching this video. When you look at the sheep brain, you'll see there's a longitudinal fissure. Again, that'll split the brain into left and right hemispheres. And then there'll be what's known as a transverse fissure that goes along in the back. That'll separate the cerebrum from the cerebellum. Okay, and in those fissures, you'll notice that that dura mater dips all the way down into those fissures. And it's particularly tough in there. All right, let me kind of hide you so you can see this better. So here's just an image of an actual human brain. They've cut off the temporal lobe here, so you can actually see there's more of these gyri underneath that temporal lobe. That's a separate area called the insula. We're really not going to talk too much about that, but give you an idea of what a human brain looks like. So we have different tracts. Again, these are sort of axons. So we don't call them nerves in the central nervous system. We call them tracts. So we have association tracts, commissural tracts, and then what are known as projection tracts. Okay. So let me give you an idea. So an association tract, and really, kind of back up a second, sorry. What we're talking about is the direction or the connections that these axons are making. Okay. So in association tracts, these axons, and they're going to be myelinated, that's why they're white, because of this myelin, so that fat looks white. Those myelinated axons are going to be between the gyri, the folds, of the same hemisphere. So when we take a look here, right, here's an association tract. If we follow this line, we'll notice that it's on the same side. It's not crossing over to the same side. It's just going from front to back. So that's an example of an association tract. Okay. In a commissural tract, so these are myelinated axons between gyri of different hemispheres. So they're going from left to right. So here we have the commissural tracts. We have two large ones. The biggest is something called the corpus callosum. And again, corpus, that term means body. And callosum, you can think of like a coliseum or something. It's large. So it's basically like a large body or colossal body. So that's this structure right here, and that will connect left and right hemispheres. Okay. So actually, you have quite, and we'll talk a little bit about this, there's quite a bit of crosstalk between the hemispheres, a lot more than people once believed. Anyway, and the last tract are what's known as projection tracts. So these go between axons between the cortex and other brain regions. So for example, here this is going from the cortex, and it might be going down, kind of lose it here, but it might be going down to the thalamus, for example. So I mentioned this to you before. There's a structure called the basal ganglia in the cerebrum. I think we mentioned this one to you before. I'm sorry. It was a substantia nigra. So the key thing here with this basal ganglia is that it's not. When I put this, it's not a structure all by itself. Really, what it is several brain regions working together to have a similar function. Okay. So you can see that the function is to initiate and terminate movements of the body. So again, all of these different brain regions are working together. They form what's, neuroscientists call the basal ganglia, and their function is to initiate and terminate movements of the body. Basically, these are going to control subconscious contractions of skeletal muscles. So I mentioned the substantia nigra to you before when we talked about the midbrain, but really all these are working together to help control these movements. So again, in particular, the substantia nigra is going to have the role of, or I should say, when you see a deficit in this area particularly, is when you start seeing sort of those tremors and shakes associated with Parkinson's disease. Okay? So that's what we mean by the subconscious and then initiation, termination of body movements. Like in Parkinson's disease, people can't stop and they don't have control over when body movements start, right? They just shake. So you've known that something has gone wrong in the basal ganglia. And the limbic system is, again, another group of different brain regions working together to a common function. So the limbic system is going to be a cluster. You can see all of them in this image here. Anything in this sort of, I don't know what color that is, steel gray color. All of those are parts of this limbic system. Now, don't freak out. I'm not going to ask you the different ones of the limbic system. It's really not worth it. The only one that I'm going to ask that you guys remember is this one right here, is the amygdala. That's sort of one, again, all of these are going to play a role in emotional memory. The amygdala plays a particularly large role in it, okay? So just kind of remember the amygdala. It is the emotional brain. It's involved in smell as well as memory. And particularly what it does is it's going to put an emotional overlay onto your memories, okay? And this is going to be really important. We'll talk a little bit well, probably at the end of this lecture, maybe the next one, about what some of the things that go wrong when we don't have connections to this limbic system, particularly to the amygdala. So you probably don't think about this very much, but when you see people, even like your classmates, you have somewhat of an emotional response to them. Now, it doesn't have to be a massive emotional response. We're not talking like, oh my God, I love you, or I hate you. You just know that, okay, I see, I don't know, Marie, and Marie is safe. Like, I know Marie is not going to punch me in the head, right? And basically, that's an emotional response. Like, okay, this is a person, I know them, they're my classmate, I feel safe around them, right? Again, it doesn't have to be a massive emotion. It's just something. Versus if you saw like a piece of paper on the floor, like a little, I don't know, one of those wipes that are on our lab desks, you saw that on the floor, it's not like you're going to have an emotional response to that. You're just like, whatever, it's a thing on the floor, I'll pick it up and I'll throw it out, right? So again, having this emotional response to certain people or even objects, like sometimes we have a real emotional attachment to, like, I don't know, our cars, right? Something happens to our car, it's like, oh, that's my baby, I can't believe it was an accident, whatever. It does affect us, right? So just kind of keep that in mind because, again, we're going to talk a bit more about how sometimes things can go wrong with those connections and exactly what that means. Okay. So again, here, biggest one I want you guys to keep in mind is this amygdala. We're going to talk more about this structure here called the hippocampus. We're going to talk more about that, particularly when we talk about memory. All right. But it also plays a role in this limbic system. Okay. and then you don't necessarily need to worry about this dentate gyrus. It kind of goes hand in hand with the hippocampus as far as emotions and memory goes. Okay, which is the other thing too. Just to kind of keep in mind, when you have a memory of something, a lot of times there's an emotional overlay on that, right? So when you see, I don't know, a particular flower or something, maybe that reminds you of the time you went on vacation somewhere, and that was like the best time ever, and that's where you met your best friend or something. I don't know. But again, there's an emotional response to simply a picture or a flower in a vase that normally wouldn't evoke an emotion to that memory, right? But it does. So hopefully that makes sense too. Just this question really is more kind of getting you guys to think about how things are named. So again, you don't necessarily have to so much worry about this, but you would have seen the mammillary bodies in lab, and we've already spoken about the thalamus. So when you see something like the mammillothalamic tract, basically the areas that that's going to connect are the mammillary bodies and then the thalamus. Okay, so you'll see these mammillothalamic tracts, right, connecting the thalamus to the mammillary bodies. That's all. Just want to again give you guys an I guess practice in the naming of things, so things don't totally sound foreign. All right. So you've probably heard of a lot of these disorders. We've already talked about Parkinson's disease a bit. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. There's things, schizophrenia, and then anxiety. What's interesting is that, so let me just kind of read this. So like all of the above are thought to occur due to a dysfunction of circuits between the basal ganglia, so the ones that are controlling movement, right, and the limbic system. So depending on where that dysfunction in the circuit is exactly, because again, as we saw, the basal ganglia is a cluster of neuron cell bodies, so neurons, of nuclei, and the limbic system is a cluster of nuclei. So depending on where that dysfunction between the two is, it may be exhibited as Parkinson's disease. It may be exhibited as OCD. It may be exhibited as schizophrenia or anxiety. And so again, it's really interesting, like, even though the same two brain regions are involved, slight nuances in exactly how that, I guess, deficit is occurring can lead to very different symptoms, right? And that's what makes some of these things so hard to diagnose and treat, right? All right, so I'm actually going to stop this right here because we're going to get into this functional organization, and I kind of want that to be a lecture in and of itself. So if you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me, and I will see you next time.